We are up in the bird's nest here at Oriole Park at Camden Yards. I'm Brendan Mortensen alongside Annie Klaff. Annie, Mike Elias and company heard our podcast last week. They knew that we had plans to do our free agent showdown and said, how about we just sign free agents and you can take your silly little idea and, well, you can get rid of it. You can get rid of that silly little idea and just talk about the free agents that we signed instead.
Yeah, they really didn't like our ideas. That's for sure.
That's why they made these signings.
They were also tired of us talking about our Volo Soccer League, so they decided to go forth and make some decisions to just quiet us up.
I know. We have a lot to get to today with the signings of Tyler O'Neill and Gary Sánchez, but they will not quiet our rec soccer conversation because, Annie, for yet another week where I was not able to play, Pathetico Madrid had another Pathetico performance. And I'm not saying it's because I wasn't able to play, but all I will say is that in games where I am injured or ill, we are 0-3. There's an obvious correlation.
At first, Brendan, I was like, all right, come on, this is all a joke. But now I'm like, okay, Brendan, let's get this show on the road. Come back, hit the pitch.
And then every time I'm there, I mean, not every time I'm there, but listen.
This season, round.
We are what? I think 2-0 when I'm there and 0-3 when I am not.
We've only had one win.
Okay, maybe we're 1-1 while I am there.
I think you're right, yeah.
And 0-3 when I am not.
The serious question is, why have you missed 3 games? That's a lot.
Injury and illness is why. I'm not exactly pushing through dire circumstances for rec soccer. And maybe I should.
You should.
Because maybe it's really to the downfall of the team at this point.
It is.
But it was another Pathetico performance for Pathetico Madrid, and we have an uphill battle to make the playoffs.
Very much uphill battle. But I think because there's not that many teams, I think everyone makes the playoffs.
Oh, well, that's nice.
I might have made that up.
We just got to get in the dance.
Yeah.
That's all that matters. But as mentioned, we have a lot to talk about today that is not our rec soccer team, and that is the signings of Tyler O'Neill and Gary Sánchez. A flurry of moves for the Orioles coming in about a span of 20 minutes, right when I was about to sit down and watch Interstellar in IMAX. The Orioles decided to make 2 big splashes, and they bring in Tyler O'Neill on a 3-year, $49.5 million deal. It does include an opt-out after the 2025 season. And then Gary Sánchez on a 1-year, $8.5 million deal. Initial reactions. We'll start with Tyler O'Neill. This is the big signing. This is going to be the most consequential day in and day out for the Orioles. Initial gut reaction, a few things. A, he very much fits the mold of what we had been talking about as a need for the Orioles, which is a right-handed hitting, powerful outfielder. Tyler O'Neill is that. 31 home runs in 113 games last year, 847 OPS, a powerful outfielder, can play right field. It's a big get, and it is something that makes a lot of sense for the middle of this Orioles lineup. And then the other, of course, gut reaction to that is that more than likely spells the end of the road for Anthony Santander. I can't imagine the Orioles bring both of those guys back to fill very similar roles. Annie, your gut reaction and initial thoughts here.
Yeah, not much different from yours. I mean, I think that we discussed this a few podcasts ago, is what kind of the rank of hierarchy of needs that the Orioles for their wish list in the offseason, and a right-handed hitting outfielder was the number 2 priority after kind of a front-end starting pitcher. So this is definitely something that fills a need. Right-handed thump, that's something the Orioles lacked in the second half of the season this past year, something that I think that they could have used in the postseason push, is someone, I mean, you look at the outfield before you bring in Tyler O'Neill, that's 3 lefty outfielders. So it would have been Heston Kjerstad, Colton Cowser, Cedric Mullins. So bringing in some right-handed thump with the kind of experience that he's had, being a Gold Glove winner 2 times. I mean, yes, that was a couple of years ago now, but still someone that has had the years that he's had, both on offense and defense. So this is definitely something that fills a need. So that's the initial gut reaction. The second gut reaction for me is if he stays healthy, this is an extremely big steal because he's had a bunch of injuries over the past few years. But when he's healthy and when he's good, he's really good. I mean, you're talking about a barrel rate in the 98th percentile, so definitely bringing that power from the right side. 87th percentile for walk rate of just 11.2%. So this is a guy that I think will definitely enhance that middle of the lineup.
Yeah, as you mentioned, when he is healthy, he is really, really good. However, he's got to stay healthy. He has a 7-year career. He has only played over 100 games in 2 of those seasons. And in the seasons that he did, he had a WAR over 6 in 2021. He was top 10 in MVP voting, had that Gold Glove, like you mentioned. And then last year in Boston, had 113 games played, and he had a WAR of 2.6. So when he is on the field, he is really, really good. And I think this is a fit that makes a lot of sense. Mike Elias did say that he anticipates O'Neill being close to an everyday player, but with a player with this much injury history. Elias also saying that they kind of think O'Neill has been unlucky with injuries. They don't think this is... Look, if you're this injured over a 7-year career, it follows you along. It is a bit of a reputation thing, but the Orioles clearly believe that it is not something that is going to follow him forever. And if they can do some things to better maintain him a little bit, you don't need him to play 160 games out of the season. If Tyler O'Neill plays 125, 130 games, you feel really, really good about the production that you'd be getting in those $120, $130 games there. And I think this fit makes a lot of sense because O'Neill has really drastic splits. This is one of the best hitters in baseball against lefties. His 90th percentile exit velocity against lefties is over 110 miles an hour. That is elite, elite, elite.
Yeah.
Like, the guy just absolutely mashes left-handed pitching. Last year, it was an OPS close to 1,200 against
crazy.
lefties. And the OPS against right-handers drops way, way off. He slugged 750 against lefties last year. Like, this is one of the best left-handed hitting, one of the best right-handed hitting against left-handed pitching hitters in all of baseball. And this is not just a last year thing. This is what he has done for his entire career. His batting average drops 100 points against righties. On-base percentage, 150 points. Slugging percentage, 300 points. O'Neill is in a perfect spot where Heston Kjerstad is a really good fourth outfielder at this point.
Mm-hmm.
Heston Kjerstad should be able to mash right-handed pitching at the big league level. It is a big, powerful left-handed swing. So, A, you have a situation where O'Neill could use some off days because you want to maintain him as much as possible with his injury history and keep him on the field. You don't want to push him too far. And B, the splits are so drastic anyway, where if you want to get Heston Kjerstad playing time, you want to see him in the outfield. Kjerstad, I think, could still get 100 games this year because he could be O'Neill's platoon in right field as a left-handed hitter to O'Neill's right-handed bat. And Kjerstad should still align as your left-handed hitting DH against right-handers with Ryan O'Hearn at first base, Heston Kjerstad as your DH, or in right field with Tyler O'Neill there. One of Tyler O'Neill and Ryan Mountcastle can still be in the lineup against righties, and then you should be able to have Kjerstad and O'Hearn. So for the concerns that bringing in an outfielder on a 3-year deal is going to completely block Heston Kjerstad, I don't think it does. I think Tyler O'Neill is kind of the perfect candidate for someone that you would want to platoon, and getting him off his feet a little bit isn't any indication of the fact that, you know, the contract's not good. You don't want him to sign a 3-year deal. That's just what he should be doing.
Yeah, and I mean, I think bringing in Tyler O'Neill is a perfect fit. I mean, you look at, when Mike Elias Brandon Hyde was asked on MLB Network in Dallas the other day, he was like, okay, what are you going to do with Heston Kjerstad? Because that is kind of a topic of conversation. He said, you bring in as many talented guys as you can, which is what you need. And I mean, you look at last year as well. When you lose Austin Hayes, you're losing that kind of right-handed thump against lefty pitchers. And then also when you lose Ramon Arias and Jordan Westberg to injuries, you kind of lost that as well. So I think that this fills that need to where, okay, you have 3 really solid outfielders. At the time they were, lefty, but then you kind of bring in that 4th outfielder and kind of it'll determine who's on the mound, who's in, kind of Heston Kjerstad or Tyler O'Neill at the time, but you kind of save that opportunity that you lost this past season. And then you also kind of save that opportunity for injury in the infield or other kind of right-handed hitters where you bring in that reinforcement, and I think Tyler O'Neill is definitely the guy to do that. It just kind of solves the case for having a lot of left-handers and a lot of young guys because he kind of reinforces that need.
Yeah, and we saw last year, obviously, the Orioles got unlucky with injuries. Brandon Hyde would tell you that. Mike Elias would tell you that. And you saw what happened when there were prominent right-handed hitting bats out. Jordan Westburg missed time, Ramon Arias missed time, Ryan Mountcastle missed time, and the Orioles lineup against left-handed pitching was really not what you wanted it to be. Obviously, going into this season, you're hoping that it's a more healthy year for Jordan Westburg and for Ryan Mountcastle, and you're hoping that it's a healthy year for Tyler O'Neill as well, but O'Neill gives you that right-handed thump that you really, really needed. Because at the top of the lineup against right-handed pitching, you have Gunnar Henderson, who is one of the best power-hitting left-handed bats in baseball. So that was not a question in terms of what the top or middle of the lineup would look like against right-handed pitching. You have Gunnar Henderson, you have Adley Rutschman, you have Colton Cowser, who was excellent against right-handed pitching last year. And now against lefties, you feel really solid about the middle of the lineup or top of the lineup. That includes Adley Rutschman, who was excellent against left-handed pitching last year, Jordan Westburg, Ryan Mountcastle, Tyler O'Neill. Those are really quality right-handed bats, and I don't think we will see as stark of a difference as we did last year between the Orioles lineup against lefties and the Orioles lineup against righties, because we know Cedric Mullins is better against right-handed pitching as well. So there is a better righty-lefty split, I think, on a game-to-game basis here.
Yeah, and I also want to kind of go back to your second gut reaction of, okay, this more than likely means no bringing back Anthony Santander. I think one of the biggest red flags in bringing back Anthony Santander was that on-base percentage. Yep. You look at Tyler O'Neill, a .336 on-base percentage. That is a big jump from, I think Anthony Santander's was .308. So that kind of also solidifies that need and fills that hole. Yes, that was for Tyler O'Neill only 113 games because of injury last season, but still I think that this is going to kind of fill some holes and question marks that you didn't necessarily get from Anthony Santander. And that's still 31 home runs in only 113 games. So that's a very comparable. I know you and I have talked about this before, where if you could have Anthony Santander back, bring up his on-base percentage, but lower his home runs just a little bit, that'd be the perfect player, and that's basically what Tyler O'Neill is.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to say. Oftentimes when we had the Anthony Santander conversation, it was, okay, can the on-base percentage get closer to 320 and the home runs get closer to 35 rather than 44? That feels like a more well-rounded player. Enter Tyler O'Neill with a 31 home run, 336 on base percentage, 847 OPS /line. That is the kind of hitter that we were hoping Anthony Santander could be if you brought him back, and you now get it in the form of Tyler O'Neill. And look, the Orioles clearly already have shown more of a willingness to spend. This is the first multi-year deal that Mike Elias has handed out. And it's a sizable contract to Tyler O'Neill, a 3-year, $49.5 million deal. That might be half of what Anthony Santander gets.
Yeah.
And if Tyler O'Neill is healthy, this is an upgrade, I think, in terms of a right-handed power bat. I think you can make an argument that Anthony Santander might be a slightly better bat overall, but this is a toss-up in terms of what they are bringing to the table there. Santander with more versatility from the right and left side. Tyler O'Neill with a better on-base percentage, with a better OPS last year. Anthony Santander has been more durable over the past few seasons, so you are taking a risk here with Tyler O'Neill. But if he stays on the field, it is possible that you brought in a better right-handed power bat who is a better defender, will have a better on-base percentage and a better OPS for half the cost. It's a large gamble because you don't know if Tyler O'Neill is going to stay healthy, and you really hope that he does because he's an excellent player when he does. And Anthony Santander, all the credit in the world to him, struggled with injuries early in his career and really seemed to figure things out in terms of his nutrition and how he was taking care of himself. Anthony Santander has earned the right to get a large contract somewhere because he is durable and he is a heck of a hitter. But Tyler O'Neill, rolling the dice here, this is a really good player on a good deal here if you're the Orioles. Now, this is going to be a kind of a quintessential slugger. It's not a 3 true outcome kind of guy because Tyler O'Neill still had 18 doubles last year, but he's 8th percentile in expected batting average last year, 5th percentile in whiff rate, 2nd percentile in strikeout rate. Now, the good thing is he adds in an 87th percentile walk rate last year, where, yes, he's striking out a lot, but he's also getting on base a lot, and he's hitting for a ton of power. But Tyler O'Neill is going to strike out a lot, and those strikeout woes really get heightened against right-handed pitching, which is why, again, I don't think this signing spells disaster for Heston Kjerstad. because I think you're going to want to keep Tyler O'Neill off his feet, and you're going to want to limit what he can do against right-handed pitching. Yes, he might be close to an everyday player, but you don't want Tyler O'Neill playing every day against righties. If Tyler O'Neill is getting a rest day, I almost guarantee you it is against right-handed pitching.
Yeah, and also I know the strikeout rate does need to come down, but I'm excited to see what he's like under this kind of Orioles coaching staff. I mean, yes, the hitting coaching staff is going to look fairly different, but I think the philosophy stays the same. I mean, we've heard that through front office press conferences since they've made the hitting coach changes, that it's not going to be a whole philosophy change. Things will evolve a little bit, but it's not going to be a whole kind of change the system, change the philosophy kind of thing. So I am excited to see what this Orioles coaching staff does with Tyler O'Neill's plate approach to kind of keep that walk rate really, really good, but also bring down the strikeout rate a lot.
Yeah, if you bring down the whiff rate for Tyler O'Neill, great, but this is also just kind of the hitter that you're getting, which is somebody who's going to swing for the fences a lot of time. Again, it is elite exit velocities. He's going to hit the ball really, really hard.
Yeah, and we've known that this Orioles front office likes to take players for what they're good at, not necessarily the overall, okay, every single thing has to be above average or average, but if you have a way above average kind of one statistic or area of play, it doesn't necessarily mean that the other ones you kind of disregard and get rid of because you won't consider him. We've known that the Orioles front office is like that when it comes to drafting and when it comes to the trade deadline, that they look at what's really, really good of a player.
Yeah, Tyler O'Neill has some elite traits. It's elite power, elite exit velocities. He has elite arm strength in right field as well. The range is not what it used to be in his, earlier prime in St. Louis, but it's still a really good arm and a solid defender. I think it's an upgrade defensively from Anthony Santander. And you mentioned something earlier that I want to circle back to, where Mike Elias said you just want to bring in good players, right? And I understand the concern about Heston Kjerstad's at-bats. I understand, wanting to leave room on a 26-man roster for somebody like Kobe Mayo, where he can come up and get everyday at-bats and prove himself. But the Orioles have a window here. And I think it's a large window because this is a core of a lot of young players that are really, really good, and they're going to be really good for a long time. But when you have a window of opportunity to win a lot of baseball games like the Orioles do, as much as you want to see Heston Kjerstad and you want to see Kobe Mayo and you want your young guys to develop, Tyler O'Neill makes a lot of sense as a fit, and you are not in the same situation you were in 5 years ago where you can just hand the keys to Adley or Gunnar and say, hey, it's your position, figure it out. Those guys did figure it out, and it's great. And Heston Kjerstad and Kobe Mayo do have that kind of potential moving forward to just take a spot, make it their everyday role, and run with it. And there's no saying Heston Kjerstad won't do that. Austin Hayes was coming off an all-star season. Colton Cowser just played so well that he took that job, and you figured out what to do with Austin Hayes down the line. Heston Kjerstad could still do that. Tyler O'Neill is not necessarily preventing that if Heston Kjerstad just lights the world on fire in his opportunities. But you have a window of winning, and you should go get Tyler O'Neill, regardless of what it means for a younger prospect that you're hoping to see. Because you hope that Heston Kjerstad gives you a season with 2.5 WAR like Tyler O'Neill did last year. Tyler O'Neill is already that, and he fills a need. And yes, it may limit what you're going to see from Heston Kjerstad every day, but A, Heston Kjerstad is still going to have a role. B, injuries and things always happen, and these things tend to work themselves out, where we always say in the offseason, where's the room for this guy? Where's the room for this guy? And then all of a sudden we get down the stretch and Levon Soto and Emmanuel Rivera are playing games, and you wish those guys were still there, right? These things always work themselves out. But Tyler O'Neill is a really good baseball player. You're a really good baseball team, and you need to sign good players to maximize your window of opportunity.
Yeah, and I know we talked about this briefly last week too, where if you bring in someone of a caliber like Tyler O'Neill in the outfield, that's going to push Heston Kjerstad, kind of light the fire under him and be like, okay, I need to work for that position. Yes, he's going to have to prove his worth from whether it's a lefty pitcher or a right-handed pitcher, because that's what you're going to need to do as a big league everyday player. But still, I think that this is good for him, where it's not going to cut all playing time out from him, but still going to kind of push him to be that competitive, like, I want that spot. And who knows, like you mentioned, it could be like a Colton Cowser for Austin Hayes type of situation this year with Heston Kjerstad trying to kind of make that everyday position player.
Yeah, you never know, right? I mean, Heston Kjerstad still has an opportunity to go out and claim some sort of close to everyday role. I don't think he's going to play every day, but there is a world where Heston Kjerstad is just excellent in the opportunities that he is given and becomes your primary designated hitter against right-handed pitching and is in the lineup every time there's a lefty and then plays occasionally against right-handed pitching and is your left-handed DH in the lineup every time there's a righty, and then is in the lineup occasionally against left-handed pitching as well. If you need him at DH, if you need him as a right fielder, like, this is not the end for Heston Kjerstad. I know that bringing in another outfielder limits his playing time, but Heston Kjerstad is going to find at-bats. And if you play well, you're going to get more at-bats. We saw it with Colton Cowser last year, who figured to be the fifth outfielder in this rotation. I mean, he was kind of behind Heston Kjerstad in the pecking order last year. And then Colton Cowser just played really well, and there he was, and now he's an everyday starter. So Heston Kjerstad still has the opportunity to do the same thing. This signing with Tyler O'Neill, though, of course, there is a little bit of emotion attached to it with Anthony Santander, more than likely out the door. Again, I can't imagine that the Orioles would bring in Santander with the addition of Tyler O'Neill here. And that's hard because Anthony Santander was in Baltimore for 8 seasons. It was a really cool story as a Rule 5 draft pick, and he was a really, really solid player, especially for the last 3 seasons where he stayed healthy, had 150-plus games in all of those seasons, was a first-time All-Star last year, finished 14th in MVP voting, was a Silver Slugger. He is obviously beloved around Baltimore. He was beloved in the clubhouse. We're going to talk about it with the addition of Gary Sánchez, but losing potentially Anthony Santander and James McCann is a big loss in this clubhouse. I think from a baseball perspective, it makes a lot of sense. It's going to be hard if Anthony Santander goes to one of the 3 teams that are reportedly very interested in the Red Sox, Blue Jays, and Yankees, and we have to see Anthony Santander a lot throughout the season wearing a different jersey, but you got to separate the emotion from it a little bit. We love Anthony Santander. He was a great guy to cover and to be around, but from a baseball perspective, this move did make sense.
Yeah, 100%. It definitely pulls at the heartstrings
a
little bit, or a lot of it, actually, for that matter, because this is a guy who kind of was there and part of this rebuild and was changed the identity of this team from kind of start to finish, from in the Elias era at least. And I think that it will definitely hurt to see him play for another team. I mean, there was always a little sliver of hope being like, okay, if Santander comes back to the O's, like, that would be awesome, regardless of on-base percentage or slugging, whatever. I think that it definitely is a bittersweet decision to see. I mean, I'm very happy with bringing in Tyler O'Neill, but again, it's a bittersweet thing for sure.
Yeah, and it's a similar feeling that I had when the Orioles dealt Trey Mancini a few years ago, where it was the deadline, the Orioles were overperforming, Trey Mancini was the heart and soul of the team, and then you dealt him at the deadline, and the return was excellent, and it was objectively a really good trade. But you just kind of went, Trey Mancini. I love Trey Mancini. And
like, same with Austin Hayes, too.
Sure. Yeah, it's a similar kind of thing.
That's the business.
Yeah, and, it makes sense from a baseball perspective. And again, Tyler O'Neill could be making half of what Anthony Santander goes out and makes. And we wish the best to Anthony Santander, but, Anthony Santander.
My man. I'm going to miss that.
I know. And so while it is a bit of a heartfelt, as you said, a bittersweet move here for the Orioles, it makes a lot of sense from a baseball perspective. Another move that makes a lot of sense from a baseball perspective is bringing in Gary Sánchez on a 1-year, $8.5 million deal. He figures to be the backup catcher and a right-handed designated hitter option, also a sneaky right-handed first base option if he is needed there. He improved a lot defensively at that position last year in Milwaukee, and he could get some run there as well. But Gary Sánchez, as backup catchers go, is a really, really good backup catcher. I thought there was a possibility that he could have been a starter somewhere. It's not elite offensive numbers, 220 batting average last year, 699 OPS, 11 home runs. He's not a great defensive catcher, but he is a slightly better defensive catcher metric-wise than James McCann. Another really big note that I like on Gary Sánchez, 33 career postseason games. This is somebody with a ton of postseason experience, obviously a lot of runs with the Yankees, with Milwaukee. He has been around the block a few times. And Gary Sánchez, I think, makes a lot of sense as a veteran leader on this team, somebody who brings a lot of playoff experience, somebody who knows what to do down the stretch. Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I think that this is a really kind of, when you lose James McCann, this is probably one of the best options to fill his shoes. You're still getting that veteran status. You're kind of getting that experience and leadership to bring him back in. I mean, he was an all-star for the Yankees in 2017, 2019, American League Silver Slugger in that 2017 year. So yes, a little bit of time ago, but it was exactly, again, similarly to the Tyler O'Neill deal, the Orioles are getting exactly what they needed. A one-year deal for a backup catcher, because we all know or hope that Samuel Basallo might come up in the 2025 season, probably towards the second half. So you needed someone to be behind Adley in that backup catcher role. And similarly to McCann, both offensively and defensively. So I think he's a little bit better offensively with a 220, 307, 392 slash line compared to McCann's 234, 279, 388. So a little bit better offensively, but very, very similar defensively. And then also something to note that Elias kept mentioning in Dallas over the news of bringing in Gary Sánchez was it's really good to pair a Spanish-speaking catcher with an English-speaking catcher behind Adley. And I didn't really think about that until Elias mentioned that, and I think that is going to be huge, whereas you didn't get that with James McCann.
Yeah, and it's not really something you think about, though.
Yeah.
But it is important in a clubhouse. When you
Very
are
important.
working with the pitching staff, it is nice to have somebody who can speak Spanish with the arms that speak Spanish.
Yeah.
Like, that's just a nice way to be able to communicate. And it wasn't, a massive downside when you had Adley and McCann, who were both English speakers primarily, but it's just a nice little bonus to have Gary Sánchez in there to be able to speak Spanish with, anybody in the rotation, anybody in the bullpen. Just a nice way to be able to communicate. But it's not a move that is going to, I think, have massive implications. I think Gary Sánchez is a solid backup catcher. He is also a solid right-handed hitting DH option. I think a lot of the time, I would be surprised if Gary DHs a ton. I do think it'll happen. I think it'll be a similar setup to James McCann, where you want to get Adley off of his feet as much as possible. You don't want Adley catching 110 times throughout the season. You would love for Adley to catch 90 games out of the year and DH a lot. So Gary Sánchez will be in the lineup, I think, primarily against left-handed pitching. Gary's splits aren't dramatic over his career, but he is a slightly better hitter against left-handed pitching than he is against right-handed pitching. So I would imagine the lineup a lot of the time against lefties will be Gary catching, Adley as your designated hitter, Tyler O'Neill in right field, Ryan Mountcastle at first base. I don't know if Gary will be your DH against righties a ton, because if Adley is catching, I would imagine, maybe you try to get Tyler O'Neill off of his feet against the lefty, and he DHs. I think it's possible that he's in there a good bit, but I think that's probably where we will see Gary the most, which is left-handed pitching, he's catching, Adley's DHing. That's his role, I think.
Yeah, and it's also very clear that Elias seems confident in his hitting abilities. He mentioned a few times already that both Tyler O'Neill and Gary Sánchez bring tremendous amounts of right-handed power, which is definitely an area of need that the O's knew that they wanted in this offseason. The other thing I want to go back to is something you mentioned a little bit earlier in the podcast, was kind of the willingness that we've seen from this front office at this winter meetings versus last year. I mean, you combine the two deals, that's $58 million already for Tyler O'Neill and Gary Sánchez, something that you might not have seen last year, where you get Corbin Burns later on, but there were trade pieces involved. So it is something to note where the willingness to spend that money and spend multi-year deals it is definitely on the forefront of their minds, and something different in this ownership.
Yeah, $8.5 million deal for a guy who figures to be a backup catcher. It's a lot of money for a backup catcher. And I think Gary Sánchez is worth that contract. I think the catcher market, especially in this free agency period, has been a little bit inflated dollars-wise, just because there's not a lot of options, and a catcher is a coveted position, obviously, and you need a solid option behind Adley Rutschman because you don't want him catching 120 games, as I mentioned. But Gary Sanchez is worth an $8.5 million contract. It's just a lot for a backup catcher. And that's a good thing because a competitive team pushing for a World Series should go after these sorts of contracts where even if you look at it from a surface level and go, whoa, $8.5 million for a backup catcher seems like kind of a lot. No, competitive teams should be doing that. They should be investing in somebody like Gary Sanchez, who, yes, even though he's a backup, could still be playing 80, 90 games this season. And yeah, we don't know what Samuel Basallo's role is going to look like this year. We anticipate that he will more than likely be called up at some point halfway through the season, hopefully, if everything goes well at AAA Norfolk. And so I don't know what that role looks like with now Gary Sanchez in the fold. Maybe Samuel Basallo is a first base DH option, and you push Gary to first base a little more with Basallo catching, and you have 3 catchers on the roster. I don't know, but Basallo is a great bat. Gary Sanchez is a good bat. I wouldn't be surprised if Basallo gets called up and Gary Sanchez is still on this roster.
Yeah, and Gary Sanchez is going to be in a pivotal part of bringing Samuel Basallo up as a catcher, not to mention that Spanish-speaking connection because that's going to be pivotal for kind of being a leader for Samuel Basallo behind the plate. I don't want to cut the Sanchez conversation short, but this also goes to show that I don't think the O's are done with bringing in some new signings. I mean, there's still a lot left on the wish list. Whether that's all the arms, really. I mean, front end starting pitcher, back end starting pitcher, lefty bullpen piece. I think the willingness that we've seen so far to go out and get players to fill those areas of needs is definitely not done, and I think that's important to think about also.
No, yeah, let's talk about what the next steps here are for the Orioles because you have filled 2 of the 3 big needs that we pointed out going into this offseason, which was powerful outfielder, backup catcher. You have that in Tyler O'Neill and Gary Sánchez. It, of course, means no Anthony Santander and no James McCann, which is a big shakeup in the clubhouse. I'm interested to see who steps up in this Orioles clubhouse. Is it time now for Gunnar Henderson and Adley Rutschman to be leaders? Because Santander and McCann were those guys. And Tyler O'Neill and Gary Sánchez are both veterans, and they have a chance to come in and step in and be some veteran leaders in the clubhouse. But Anthony Santander was here for 8 seasons. This clubhouse, it wasn't Anthony Santander's team in terms of, who was leading on the field and things like that, but somebody who was there for 8 years. Santander, Cedric Mullins, Austin Hayes, those were kind of the consistent key pieces in the clubhouse. John Means, another one. His future in Baltimore uncertain as well. James McCann had been in Baltimore for 2 seasons. He was very well established in the clubhouse. O'Neill and Sánchez are new and coming in, and I'm sure will integrate well and work well in the clubhouse. But it's time for this to be Adley Rutschman's team, both, on the field and in the clubhouse. Same goes for Gunnar Henderson. I know he's a young guy, but it's got to be Gunnar Henderson's team in the clubhouse. Cedric Mullins, of course, a great veteran leader as well, who has been around for a while. And there are older guys in the clubhouse, but this is the time for Adley and for Gunnar to take the steps up with no Santander, with no McCann, and say, okay, this is my team. Here we go.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, they have been the faces of this organization probably ever since they made it to the big leagues, and now it's definitely the time to kind of fill those leadership roles as well, something that they necessarily have not. I mean, they've been leaders, but not in the way that is needed for them right now, and I totally agree. That it is the time when you lose Santander, you lose McCann, pivotal people to this clubhouse. I think that it is definitely kind of the way and the perfect time and place for Gunnar and Adley, and even Jordan Westberg. I mean, he's definitely going to be more of the unsung hero type of person, but they all need to step up and fill those leadership roles.
Yeah, I think this is the time. And not that those guys haven't been vocal in the clubhouse before, but this is the time that they've got to step up and say, okay, we're taking over this team. This is our team. And this is where we're going. And I think they will. Brandon Hyde and Mike Elias have said that over the past few days, that they are confident that it's time for Adley Rutschman and Gunnar Henderson to really take a step forward leadership-wise. So those 2 holes are filled in the outfield and at catcher. And I think with the guys in-house, kind of the leadership roles are going to be covered there. But in terms of what's next, it's still pitching. That was the number one need that we outlined going into the offseason. Will it be an ace? I don't know. Because a lot of those guys that you would be looking at as a number one, number two starter are off the board. There's really one ace left, and it's Corbin Burnes, who is, still a possibility. Obviously have not ruled anything out, but he is going to be pricey because Max Fried just got $218 million reportedly from the New York Yankees. And if Max Fried's getting $218, $250 for Corbin Burnes?
I don't even know, but it's going. It would break the bank, that's for sure.
It's gonna be pricey,
and Max he deserves Fried, all of it.
Yes,
but
he does. Max Fried reportedly at 218. Blake Snell reportedly at 182. Nathan Eovaldi reportedly at 3 for $75. It's a really hefty contract for him. Luis Severino at 67. Yusei Kikuchi at 63. Clay Holmes at 38. Pretty much every front line potential starting pitcher that you could think of has gone over their projection for their free agent contract reportedly. So Corbin Burnes is going to be expensive if you are still in on Corbin Burnes. If you're looking for an ace, it's really Burnes. It's the potential of Sasaki. Maybe Sean Manaea.
Yeah.
I don't know if you would call Manaea really an ace, but he was excellent last year. We talked about his new mechanics, how he's kind of a different pitcher now. Sean Manaea, certainly a possibility if you want to add a number 2, number 3 guy into that mix. Brandon Hyde mentioning that he thinks Grayson Rodriguez could step up and be an ace type of pitcher next year, so maybe that ace is internal. I don't know. Brandon Hyde and Mike Elias have said that they are happy with where the pitching rotation is at, but they are still looking to add good players. The pitching staff is really the only place I think that you can add at this point because the position players seem to be set. There are 13 guys that you can really pencil in to the 26-man active roster with the additions of O'Neill and Gary Sánchez, assuming that Jackson Holliday makes the roster, which we are assuming that he will. Jorge Mateo makes the roster as well. And that even leaves Kobe Mayo and Emmanuel Rivera on the outside looking in at 14 and 15. So I can't imagine that another position player comes in. But pitching side, I think there's some room to operate.
Yeah, and it's definitely a hot commodity among all teams is getting some pitching, and Mike Elias knows that. But I kind of like the idea of Sean Manaea. I do think you're right. He slots more into a 2, number 3 kind of guy, but I also really like having a lefty in that top 3 of the rotation.
Yeah.
Because that's needed. It'll definitely be interesting because not many guys, none of them really, besides Corbin Burnes, are that true ace.
No.
Max Fried would have been that other guy, Blake Snell, but so we'll see, to be honest.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think somebody like Manaea still makes a lot of sense as a left-handed option. Right now, the top of the rotation is Grayson Rodriguez, Zach Eflin, Dean Kramer. Cade Povich is hopefully on the come-up, but, Sean Manaea is that guy right now. So it wouldn't surprise me to see the Orioles go after somebody like him. And I think in Tyler O'Neill and Gary Sánchez, they are more expensive than we have seen the Orioles make moves the past few seasons, but they are still savvy moves where you're not completely breaking the bank for somebody like Tyler O'Neill because of the injury history and because of the inconsistency. You are able to roll the dice and get him on a less expensive contract than it would take to re-sign somebody like Anthony Santander. Gary Sánchez, it's an $8.5 million deal. It's only an $8.5 million deal for 1 year. So it still leaves you a lot of flexibility this offseason to make some moves. But we will see what the Orioles end up doing. I still think there are moves to come on the pitching side of things. Could come via free agency, could come via trade, because there are reportedly a few good pitchers that are available via trade right now. Garrett Crochet, maybe some guys in Houston that we didn't think were available. Framber Valdez, perhaps, would be a perfect fit in Baltimore, maybe. So I don't know. We'll see if it comes via free agency or via trade, but the Orioles are making moves. They're making a push, and Tyler O'Neill and Gary Sánchez are going to help the Orioles make their push towards September. I think that'll just about do it for this week's edition of The Bird's Nest. Thank you so much for following along with us live on YouTube and Facebook. We are live every Wednesday at 11 a.m. on those two platforms. or you can catch us after the fact on Spotify, SoundCloud, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts or your digital shows. You can find us here on The Bird's Nest. Big thank you to Amy Jennings behind the scenes for producing this one. For Annie Klaff, I am Brendan Mortensen, and we'll catch you next time.